After our last episode, I became fascinated by the idea of the UK fanzine writers who were also in bands, or ran a cassette label, or did all three at the same time. We tracked down Martin Bose from Attrition and Alan Ryder of Adventures in Reality to dig into the world of DIY publishing. This is cassette culture. From 1979 to 1981, Martin Bose wrote the Alternative Sounds fanzine, based in the Midland city of Coventry. He's also founder of the long-running electronic industrial band Attrition, still releasing new music and touring everywhere from the UK to Thailand, Australia and Hong Kong. I don't have a question written or anything about what you've just told me, but could you talk about the fanzine that you started?
No, I got really inspired by punk rock, and I just had to do some music, you know. Obviously, like lots of people, I was at art college actually at the time. That's like 1978 or something like that. I just thought, well, I love these fanzines. A lot of the same people went on to start cassette labels, so I started one. The fanzine's called Alternative Sounds, and Coventry was quite booming at the time. There's a lot of bands, but famously there was the Specials and Two Tone starting, so there was a lot of interest in what was going on here. It was March 1979 was the first issue. You know, I interviewed the Specials, obviously, and all the local bands. And I mean, bands over here back in that day would do 30-day UK tours. Pretty much everyone would come to Coventry, you know. I went to see the Sex Pistols and the Clash and then the Human League, which suddenly our first electronic band. It was great. So I had something to express myself, I guess, with writing about it. I did 18 issues, actually.
And so then you sort of jumped right into working on Attrition.
Yeah, so we were doing gigs, and the good thing about the fanzine circuit or scene was because I did mine, you'd trade them with other people around the country and in other countries as well. And so when I started the band, I'd got contacts because almost every fanzine editor had a band.
In our Wild Planet episode, sounds journalist Dave Henderson talked about meeting a set of influential contacts at the UK Electronica Festival in 1983. And the fanzines that they were producing led him to discover other bands whose music he'd soon include on his first compilation LP, The Elephant Table.
All these guys had fanzines and cassettes like Nocturnal Emissions, Attrition, Portion Control. They were all there, and I met a lot of those people. And as I say, they had fanzines, and within them there were people like Esplendid, Geometrico, DDAA, all those kind of guys who eventually I probably wrote to them because we didn't have the internet then and said, "Hey, I've heard about your music. Can you send me something?" And then lots of stuff would come.
One of the guys who Dave met was Alan Ryder, creator of the Adventures in Reality fanzine and label, who by this time was already 11 issues into his fanzine and had released 5 cassettes on the Adventures in Reality recordings label.
I was good friends with and involved with Attrition and some of the people that were doing electronic music in Coventry at the time, and also doing stuff myself. So it was interchangeable, really. So for myself, with Adventures in Reality, very much a local thing, very small, little hand-written A5 size fanzines. And cassettes really were a massive revolution in that they put that means of production control back in the hands of individuals, bands, small labels, and people doing fanzines often decided that they would also do a cassette label. I did myself, in that I felt I was writing about this stuff, but it was good stuff and I wanted people to hear it. I was in touch with lots of other people writing the fanzines, and we used to exchange stuff. So they would send me their fanzine, I would put it in the local shops. I would send them my fanzine, they would put it in their local shops. So you had an informal distribution network, and then you had mail order operations. Some of them were like rough trade. They had advertised in the back of the music papers. Others were much more smaller level, and they'd sell cassettes as well, of course. So there was a little network that started to form there. So you gradually expanded out from your local town to the next town, and then Tower Records decided to take some, so they got them into the States as well. And Rough Trade took some, and they had a store in San Francisco, so they went over there. And then I used to post them to places in Australia and places all over Europe as well.
It's a self-contained recording studio designed to give the enthusiast access to some of the basic features of the real thing, but in a manageable, miniature package. Some big studios these days handle as many as 40 separate tracks. This studio in miniature offers just 4. It records onto a conventional cassette of tape, but it runs at twice the normal speed.
The technology revolution that was gathering momentum during the 80s created more means of production for recording artists in the Tascam Portastudio, a portable 4-track cassette recorder which brought the possibilities of a small recording studio to the bedrooms of underground musicians around the world. I've had a couple of conversations with some artists about the cassette 4-track. Do you ever see those, the Tascam 244?
I bought one in 1981. I got the TIAC 4-track cassette. Yeah.
Yeah, what a revolutionary, piece of technology that was.
That's how we started recording lots of demos, and our early cassette releases were on that. Because I used to put the tapes backwards sometimes, and then do. I remember getting a recording of Mariannes. She sang something on a regular cassette, and I turned it backwards into the 4-track, and it was half speed because the 4-tracks ran at double, didn't they? So it was like a really strange vocal, and then I added things to it, and there's a track called Marianne's Dream, which is that's how I did it. In 83, we did an album with a band from Seattle called Audio Letter, and basically it was with 4-track tapes. So I guess we must have just written letters then. I don't know, it's crazy actually. So we used to record something on a 4-track and then send it to each other, and then the other band would finish it off. We'd use 2 tracks. They'd use 2, but we did that and then released that. So that was really cool to do, and do a collaboration with a band from Seattle.
Isn't it time you explored a new frontier?
Read Dianetics by L. Ron Hubbard. The adventure is waiting for you wherever paperbacks are sold.
I'm going to be praying for a mighty spiritual revival. And just pick a time, say, God, what time? Some of it. We're going to show you something about an alarming development in music that has come over to us from England called punk rock.
Around the same time, the Wild Planet column started to review the new wave of... It was like punk mixed with industrial and just creative, really. It didn't really have a strict genre. But through that, I remember writing to some of the bands and got to know Ed Caspell from the legendary Pink Dots. And then there was people starting labels like Gary Levermore started Third Mind Records. He did a fanzine before he did that called Tone Deaf. And he did, you probably heard of the Rising from the Red Sand collection. There was 5 cassettes. We were on 3 volumes of that.
That was like a landmark release, I would say.
Yeah. And they would sell a lot. They'd do at least 500 copies of each one, or maybe 1,000. And so he made a bit of money off the tapes and decided to do vinyl then. So he did it. He did like Nurse with Wound and quite experimental stuff. So then he asked us to do an album, and our first album, the first Attrition vinyl, came out in 1984. And but he thought it was quite commercial because it compared to the other bands it was, but it wasn't really. My friend Alan did Adventures in Reality tapes, and he did The Last Supper cassette. That had SPK on, actually, in Test Department, and we were on it. And I think he sold 2,000 of that.
The first edition was only like 100 copies that was done, which I copied myself at home. And then I took them down to Rough Trade Records in London, and they just said, yeah, we'll have these, because it had like, SPK, Test Department, and people that they knew on it. And they said, and we'll have another 500, please. And I went, okay. So I went back to Coventry and went, there's no way I'm ever going to...
You're going to do tape-to-tape copies for 500?
Yeah, I was copying them in real time, so you can imagine how long that took just to do hundreds. So I just went and borrowed some money off my parents and went to a commercial cassette producer that could do these things at quantity. Got it all, went into a studio, got it mastered onto reel-to-reel, because I needed it on reel-to-reel, and took it in there and got like 1,000 done. Took the 500 down to Rough Trade. They sold them all, and then there's some more, and then we did some more. So it sold a lot, and because it was produced with this what they call on-body printing, where it's printed on the side of a cassette, it meant that, and Rough Trade were doing it, it got into record shops all over the world. So they had lots of cassettes in record shops at the time, old racks of them. So it was in there, which meant that it sold, a lot. There was a few licensing arrangements with different countries for people to do versions of it as well. It's never been reissued on CD or record or anything. It's only ever been that cassette. The last issue of the fanzine proper was The Last Supper, had a booklet with it. And that was basically the last issue of the fanzines. So they were alphabetically numbered. That was issue L.
The biggest question that I wanted to ask you around that Last Supper release is, I was just looking it up, and I found a little scan of something that must have been put in there that talks about a ZX Spectrum program being on the cassette as well as music.
You could load computer programs off cassettes in those days. So if you plugged it into your ZX Spectrum, which a lot of people had, or ZX81, you could download this program. And we coded a little, it's a catalogue, it's like a list of the releases, so that you could download those, and it made this kind of screeching noise.
So that's when it sort of blossomed, if you like. We were on there's an album called the Elephant Table album that was a spin-off of the Wild Planet articles, and Dave Henderson put together a double album of, all the bands like Pink Dots and Attrition and Coil, the first Coil track, Portion Control, Nurse with Wind, all these bands. That was great. So, and then that was the first track I had on vinyl in late 83. I remember showing it to a friend in the street. I was so excited.
The distribution network that Martin and Alan talk about was called the Cartel, a cooperative of small independent record labels who pooled their resources to create a network enabling wide distribution of their releases. The architect of the Cartel was Richard Scott of London's Rough Trade. The network brought UK independent music to stores around the world, running throughout the 80s and finally ceasing business at the end of that decade.
It was a good network then, because Rough Trade Records would distribute, and then they teamed up with local independent distributors around the country. There was Red Rhino and Bax. So the independent network could compete with the majors because they had lots of independents getting together. It was really exciting, actually, those days. In fact, I think a lot of the sales for this sort of music did better in Europe. When we got our first 12-inch single, which was early 84, we did a split record with a Swiss band called Shaman and Circle. But we got these big screen-printed covers because it's a 12-inch record. You can imagine it folded around about 3 times. So I got this big roll of printed covers came from Switzerland. And we spent ages. We had to fold them and number them, and we'd all over the living room floor, the whole band, doing we had 1,000. It's so it was all that hand done thing was wonderful, actually. Our song was Monkey in a Bin, and on that split 12-inch, and John Peel played it, and I found a recording of him introducing us, playing it recently.
This next is Monkey in a Bin, which sounds like the kind of thing that you can probably buy to eat in Covent Garden, and it's by Attrition from Recording Union, which is it's a 12-inch single or 12-inch EP, and on the other side of it, some tracks by, I think, a Swiss band whose name I almost certainly can't pronounce. Let's listen to it.
I'd noticed a few names coming up for, remix credits and things like that. And a lot of the artists that were on Rising from the Red Sand as well, like Chris and Cozy and legendary Pink Dots. And how did you foster those relationships or maintain those relationships with the different artists?
Well, we just used to write to each other at first anyway, and then I remember there was a festival called UK Electronica in 1983, and it was in Milton Keynes, but it had this festival, so we went down and we got the train, and Chris and Cozy were on, so I got to meet them, and then Ed from the Pink Dots was there, he wasn't playing, and Gary from Third Mind was there, So that was the first time I'd met both of them. I think they had Hawkwind on, actually. There's some people I didn't meet, but it was a good festival. So we got to, once you've met them, it's a bit better when you met someone in person. And then we did that tour with the Dots, and then we ended up moving down to London from Coventry not long after, and shared a house with them.
She wasn't listening, busy shaking cocktails laying out the table, all the big names coming for the party. Marks the start of the golden age, resistance finished, bouquets line the hall, telephone forever ringing, singing in the streets. Hooray, hooray, hooray.
Do you have any kind of reflections on how the culture of those times sort of encouraged that kind of communication, because it was so, regular that people would publish addresses or phone numbers in magazines?
Yeah.
I just wondered, did that actually kind of foster a more open attitude to getting in touch?
I think it was out of punk, even though a lot of the bands weren't punk, but it was definitely an alternative thing. That was, to me, came from punk, and that, just not using the mainstream, just doing it anyway. And so I think, everyone was happy to do that. There wasn't, I don't know, people nowadays worry about having their contacts out, and I think, well, why are you worried? What's going to happen? You used to get weird fans sometimes. When we moved to London, it was like, we're in London, can we come and say hi? And we'd go, oh, all right, yeah. And then it'd be a bit strange, but it didn't matter. It was all interesting people to meet.
You'd actually have that experience of people somehow finding your number and saying, can we come over?
Well, they'd have the address on the albums, It was never a problem. And it was, maybe in a way it was a sort of naivety, but it was more open, I think. It was definitely seen more open. And I got into the anarchist thing, and I love Crass. They were like nearest thing I have to a Bible. And there was a whole scene like that, and that was great. And that encouraged so many people were just doing it themselves. There'd be reviews in fanzines, and then I'd get a couple of orders. And people would put soap on their stamps so you could wipe the franking off and use them again. It was like a little anarchist thing going on. For years, we got on bigger labels, and we didn't do anything like that for years. And then with a little bit of a collapse of the music industry, when everything was illegally downloaded or whatever, and there was CD sales plummeted in the millennium, really, around then. With all that, and it went back to small releases again with interesting packaging and vinyl. And I loved it because I thought, oh, wow, this is just like being back in the early days. And I really embraced that, actually, because I enjoyed that more than having, we got up to 10,000 CD sales when we were on Project Records in America. But it was still great. It was still great, but it had lost a little bit of that human touch to it, really, that you had in the 80s, I think. We did a cassette version of the new album. I thought that's a little bit of a full circle again, because we'd had done a couple of cassette reissues over the last few years on other labels. There was the Death House soundtrack, and there was a collection of rarities, actually. They sold straight away, and then I thought, I want to do a cassette of the new one. So, I did vinyl, CD and cassette. And so I just did 50, but I was really pleased. It looks great. But I just liked the look of it, and it covered the costs immediately. So I've got a few, So it was nice. It made me smile to have another cassette out.
In this episode of Cassette Culture, you heard the voices of Martin Bowes, Dave Henderson, Alan Ryder, and me, Martin Franklin. Music was Dead of Night by Attrition from The Death House on Adventures in Reality recordings. Jam 2 by Hawkwind from the UK Electronica Festival 1983. Marianne's Dream by Attrition. Talkback by Attrition with audio letter. Someone Other's Garden by Nurse with Wound from the Elephant Table LP. Trans Time by Muslimgauze from The Last Supper on Adventures in Reality recordings. Monkey in a Bin by Attrition from The John Peel Show on BBC Radio 1. Surprise Surprise by the legendary Pink Dots from The Elephant Table. The Black Mariah by Attrition from their new album The Black Mariah.
And what's next? Let's track of these things. Oh yes, this one will clear your sinuses for sure.